Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today, I am delighted to be joined all the way over from the States by Manish Patel of Tier1 Financial Solutions. Manish, how are you?
I'm doing well, Toby. How about yourself?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Really good. It's been great just talking off air beforehand, and I'm extremely jealous of you having got onto a plane and had an actual business trip. So you've been out to the New York office and moving around and actually getting back to some sort of normal life again. How good's that?
Yeah, no, as I was saying, it was the kid in the candy shop trying to learn how to ride a bike again, packing for a 3-day trip, which we haven't done for like 14 months or so. And then that nervous energy of getting on a plane, but the excitement of actually getting out of our houses. I think we're getting there, right? The end is in sight. Hopefully, we could see some normalcy return over the course of this year.
Touch wood, absolutely. So very, very interesting business and an interesting time, which I'm really looking forward to unpicking over the course of the next half hour or so. But before we get into that, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and Tier1?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer of our CRM business unit here at Tier1 Financial Solutions. The company as a whole, we offer CRM workflow solutions into capital markets and investment banking. And then also compliance solutions to do with anti-money laundering, sanction screening, those types of activities around how you get to know your customer before you start doing business with them, right? So really kind of my role here is to oversee all of the business functions within the CRM role, CRM business unit. And kind of my background kind of really always has been in financial services, both on the client side and the vendor side. So I spent 15 years of my career at ING in London, working within financial markets, really kind of working more in a technology business role, trying to get away from legacy platforms onto more like cloud-based, vendor-based platforms. So that was kind of like my real like kind of initial career within financial markets. And then I emigrated out to the States about 10 years ago to run a CRM and book building and event management platform for a company called iPrio, before moving over to Tier1, initially as their chief product officer, but now their COO.
Fantastic. And it's a really interesting space you're in there as well, because I think we've probably seen, there's been a lot of change over the last 14 months, as you say, probably none more so within that sort of CRM world, where we've seen a demonstrable sort of adoption in capital markets, to see it more than just a role of it. There's so much more that's involved and engaged within that. Give us your overview at the moment of what's happening and the new world of the CRM.
Yeah, Toby, I think you're right. There's just been an evolution, right? I think historically, when I look back over my career and my experiences, everyone looked at a CRM as a place where you just put data in, you look up a person, you get a phone number, you get an email address, right? And you go and contact that person, right? I think those days have really just like kind of gone, right? This is now more about how does your CRM help you drive relationships, revenue, help you mitigate risk. So kind of one of the things that we've been doing is really kind of more thought leadership around what we call redefining the R in CRM, right? So if you look at it traditionally, it's client relationship management, but that R can really mean more than just how do you maintain a relationship. It kind of dives into all of those things that I said earlier, which is it's revenue. At the end of the day, you're maintaining your customer relationships in one way or another to drive revenue, right? And that's the end goal for a lot of our customers, is to say, how can I maintain a share of the wallet within the capital markets world in an increasingly competitive market? And to do that, you need technology and you need solutions that help you manage all of that data in a concise manner, but also to mitigate the risk. So when I talk about risk, it's really around two facets. The relationship risk is key. So if you have information around a relationship with the customer, and that information lives within an individual's mind or their Excel spreadsheet or their notebook, you have this risk, if you have any sort of staff attrition, right, that you're going to lose that connectivity with that customer. That's obviously kind of one of the main risks and one of the things that a CRM really accommodates for. But then there's also the risk around regulatory and compliance issues. right? A lot of the capital markets world has gone through a lot of transformation in terms of the regulations in place, in terms of the things that you need to do in terms of compliance. So these are all of the things that an evolving CRM need to cater for, rather than just being, as you said, just the Rolodex.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because I love that phrase, and I've just jotted it down here as we're talking. You may see it come up when we put this out on social media, because I think it's a brilliant catchword. Redefining the R in CRM is a really great way of putting it, isn't it? Because this show's been running 3 times a week for the last year, and we've spoken to a plethora of businesses who've done very, very well over the course of a really difficult period. And I say this almost every episode now. There's golden threads that sort of run through all of those businesses about really looking at specific problems and redefining those problems and creating value to the customers who they're talking about. When you talk there about risk mitigation, that's one part of it, isn't it? There's a continuing need and concern for businesses to be on top of that sort of area. Yeah. But the other side of it, which I think the capital markets arena has been particularly slow on, and I've said this for some time, is the real benefit that you've got through managing data correctly and actually driving it, as I'm very interested in you talking about, as the revenue generation aspect of it, because it's been a sort of beige subject for some time. CRMs, it's not something which is going to get people leaping out their seats, but as soon as you start to look at it and say, what is it and how do you make it work for you, that beige suddenly becomes a very vibrant fuchsia in terms of
absolutely.
In terms of where you can go with it. Tell me a little bit about how you're seeing that sort of significance and importance develop.
Yeah, and I think it goes along the same theme, right? You're 100% right that the beige needs to be transformed into something a bit more vibrant, right? Because that's that transformation that's needed. And then when you think about CRMs, they can be the source of truth for a lot of information that capital markets constituents need in order to make decisions, right? So it isn't just about saying, hey, here's an email address, here's a phone number, here's an interaction that I had with this customer and I spoke to them. Yeah, they weren't interested. It's more than that. It's what are they consuming from you, right? What services are you providing to them? How much are they consuming? What do you value that service at? Then flipping that round to say, well, if I'm providing this kind of value in services, what am I generating in revenue from that client? And how can I generate more? So all of this data that lives within what we call traditionally a CRM, or within the ecosystem of the CRM world, needs to be connected to tell a story. Yeah. So when you think about just basic things like, hey, I have a capital markets customer that has an interest in, let's just take Apple as a security. That's great knowing they have an interest, but what triggers you to make contact with that customer? Either they've done something, or you've heard something, or the market is doing something. Connecting all of those data points to be able to give our clients and those people that are using the CRM signals and analytics to provide them with, who should you call next? Why should you call them? Why is it important? And then at the end goal of that, why should they transact with you so that you can generate revenue?
I think it's a really underused area or under talked about area, but it's been something which has become more and more on the radar, irrespective of the pandemic. Without question, I think with this sort of move from the office to home that we've had globally over the course of last year, it's been thrust into the spotlight, and without doubt a sort of petrol on the bonfire of the whole movement. But to me, it seems that this has been something that's been growing for some time anyway. Yeah. Do you think this whole increasing significance of the CRM has been inevitable? Would have happened anyway, or has this just been an accelerator, or is this purely because of the pandemic? What's your thoughts there?
I think really what's happened is it's accelerated it. I think a lot of the companies or the banks or the brokers or the independent research shop were thinking about this, right? And some of the larger players were actioning on it. And we talk about like digital transformation. It's a overused word, but a word that comes up a lot of times, right? It's like, hey, we're going to do a digital transformation, right? What does that mean? But it's really planning out how you do that. And as I said, some of the larger players and larger clients really were looking at that from pre-pandemic days, right? I think what's happened is some of those that were like, okay, well, that's too much to bite off right now. I don't have the capabilities, the time, the investment to be able to do that. The pandemic has accelerated, right? Because information sharing in a pandemic when everybody is distributed is a pain, right? Those days when, hey, you were all sitting on a desk, you could just turn around, shout across the desk, get a piece of information, someone would overhear you talking, water cooler talk, all of those things all got ripped away from us last February, right? And then we're all sitting in my home, your home, someone else's home, right? Trying to have that same type of interaction, and you can't do that without technology, right? So we saw a really big uptick right at the beginning of the pandemic around mobile access, around how do we get information shared across different parts of the businesses in a more fluent manner that kind of superseded the need to have like people in offices and etc. So I think it's definitely an accelerator from my perspective. And the pandemic is actually, we talk about silver linings. I think it's going to help a lot of institutions within capital markets actually be more transformed by the time we come out of this.
Yeah, I think that's a massive point, isn't it? This period has been one which has been tremendously socially difficult, politically difficult, economically difficult for so many people, from a human element. But within it, there's been a lot of opportunities to improve and get better.
Yeah.
And coming back to those golden threads, the businesses that have said, right, here's a negative, how do we turn it into a positive? I think has been a common theme of businesses have thrived through this sort of period. And I think, there's often an embarrassment about sort of talking about some of that sort of thing. But actually, my view has always been to celebrate that sort of asset, that sort of viewpoint, because it's been an incredibly inspiring thing for me to see week in, week out, every single week over the course of the last year, of businesses that have just got things brilliantly right and looked at problems and said, how can we, rather than sort of shy away from this, look at the opportunities. And as you say, look, this pandemic accelerating the need of a great opportunity within financial services to do things better has been good to see, and something that would happen 5 years quicker than potentially it would have done elsewhere.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at some of the results coming out of some of the banks within the capital markets world, right, they haven't skipped a beat.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the earnings that are coming out are just phenomenal. Investment banking is up year on year. And no one would have thought that at the beginning of last year, when we all kind of went into lockdown in different various states. That
we saw the plummeting numbers, didn't we, on the exchanges at that sort of stage? I mean, we almost forget about that, about how steep it was at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, we bottomed out on the market, but as you can see, it's resiliency and then that adaptation of getting back to normal. And as you say, companies actually saying, hey, there's an opportunity here, right? This is a good time, right? Yeah. Once you kind of get past that initial, like, whoa, what the hell happened?
Yeah, no, very, very, very interesting. It's sort of impacted all sorts of areas. I mean, you look at corporate access as an example that's been heavily impacted. What have you seen there?
So, hey, listen, that's I think in our world, probably one of the most biggest impacted areas, right? Because if you think about corporate access, the value of corporate access is putting people together physically to have a conversation. Whether it's you're taking an investor on the road, or whether you're taking a corporate out to see investors, or whether you're hosting a 3-day multi-track conference, right, around a specific sector, whether it's healthcare, energy, technology, etc. Those were the flagship events for a lot of our sell-side customers.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, those things don't happen the way they used to happen, and you have to adapt. Right? It's like you're running around going, okay, how do I still get corporates and investors together? And how do I help facilitate those types of discussions that are so valuable to both the buy side and the sell side and the corporate? It took some time, but I think a lot of people started going, okay, there's a way to do this, right? Whether it's, hey, we're going to do these things all virtually, right? We're going to use Zoom. We're going to use other best-in-breed video conferencing solutions. And to be honest, I think it's now become so natural that actually, you know what? We can get corporates and investors together and actually thinking about it, it's easier. I don't have to get these people on a plane. I don't have to worry about hotels. I don't have to worry about pickups from the airport. Is it as valuable? Time will tell, right? But I think really kind of it's shone a new light on this traditional way of thinking about corporate access. And hey, technology has a part to play that can connect individuals. But as I said, time will tell whether the value is still there compared to it being a face-to-face meeting discussing topics.
Yeah, I was having this conversation just earlier on today, because I think the only thing that will tell is time on that, right? Because it's one of those conversations that's so difficult to predict. My gut tells me, just knowing people and seeing things ahead of it, that actually that sort of half-hour meeting that someone's flown across the Atlantic for, it can be seen as frivolous, right? It can be seen as massively it can be seen as massively economically unviable. It can be seen as, for the environment, it's not the best thing in the world to have executives flying to and fro. But my view is that people will see that sort of ability to connect and meet as still something which is, from a very human basis, it's very important. And whether that's right or wrong, and whether the days of Zoom and international meetings are here to stay, I think there will be definitely some improvements that are made from it. But I don't see this as the end of people jumping into planes and having that sort of mixture. But that hybrid world of both, I think, is going to be a really interesting thing to see.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, right? It's this hybrid world. And I think what we've been through over the last year or so has really proved that there are different ways of doing traditional activities within our industry. I don't think it's ever going to be black or white one way or the other, but I do really believe, as you said, like this hybrid world will allow access for more investors of varying size to corporates of varying size. That wasn't available traditionally 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's available. I mean, the timing of it is been absolutely perfect, isn't it, in terms of how evolved the tech is to be able to do this. And it's just whether it was available at that sort of stage, just in a slightly poorer manner, or adopted and viable and seen as the done thing at that sort of stage is also the other aspect, isn't it?
Listen, we can probably sit here and think 10 years back, and if this had happened then, and
very different story.
We were still using Blackberries, and there was no such thing as a smartphone, right? I think it would have been a different world.
I found my BlackBerry the other day from about 11 years ago, and I know exactly what you mean. That would have been an interesting turn of events.
Exactly.
Listen, I want to focus in as well on Tier 1 and your success and growth over this sort of period, because another one of the things I talk about a lot on this show has been offense versus defense. The people who've sat it out and those who've gone in there and moved further forward. Now, in a lot of cases that I've had conversations with, that's been about organic growth and adding to the team and sort of going through it. Rarely over the course of the last 14 months. And I've spoken to companies that have taken investment, and we've seen companies who've been acquired and swallowed up. This is a rare privilege for me to speak to someone who's been involved in an acquisition trail at a time when most people would probably be playing it a little bit more conservatively and cautiously. And I find that fascinating. So I'd really love to dive into that, because what's really, really interesting to me about this is that sort of commitment to you that you guys have very clearly had to that long-term vision, because I think people have sort of very much reverted to the short term as opposed to looking to the authenticity of sticking to the plan and moving through that long-term plan. Now, that ties into you and the mission of the single source of truth, which I think comes back into it and saying, right, let's build that end-to-end solution for our customers. I love the fact that you've seen that as an opportunity to really cement that over the last year, and I'd love to dive into your sort of story a little bit on what sort of, I guess, the why and maybe even some of the challenges and opportunities that came up with around that sort of acquisition trail over the last year or so.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Toby. So it's been a whirlwind year. Let's say that. Kind of, there's been a lot going on. We started kind of middle of last year, just after the pandemic hit, really around pre-packaging our products and offerings into the market, becoming a bit more turnkey, becoming more accessible to different levels of investment banks and research providers and broker dealers within the market, right? So that was really our kind of like initial start. How do we make our products and services more accessible to the broader market? Then once we kind of started seeing traction on that, really kind of we looked at the single source of truth, but also there's a client relationship life cycle here, right? So we manage hey, here's your relationship, here's how you manage your revenue, here's how you manage your risk. And we saw an opportunity that prior to that, before a client becomes a customer of yours, there's the whole onboarding part of it, right? So how do you know who your customer is? How do you do the checks that are needed? How do you bring them on in a compliant manner? And really, the KYC of how do you know your customer? So we kind of looked around and we went, that would be a great asset to add to the organization to start stitching together the story around this end-to-end client relationship management. So we acquired a company called Alessa in January of this year. And I will say, doing a acquisition during a pandemic is a brand new experience.
That's what I want to dig into.
those management meetings, those presentations, those body cues that you can pick up on when you're in a face-to-face meeting, in a boardroom, getting a presentation or talking to people, the water cooler talk, all of that went out the window. It's very structured, scheduled meetings that defined like kind of what you were going to hear, how you were going to hear it. And it really took a lot of emotional and kind of like Excel skills to really dig into a lot of like kind of what were you buying, right? What is available here, right? How do you assess it, right? Yeah. Without meeting a broader set of people, without hearing what the culture is like or seeing what the culture is like at someone's office, right? The crazy thing was we closed an acquisition of Alessa in less than 3 months during a pandemic. But I think, as you said, it was an opportunity for us, right? We saw it as an offensive move. We saw it as somewhere that it adds value to what we can provide to the constituents within our market, and really starts looking at our long-term strategy around connecting the end-to-end of the client lifecycle, but also this golden source of truth where data is the thread that goes all the way through it.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, and you're right there about it. I've spoken to investors and people who've taken investment. I've spoken to people who had their business bought over this sort of period, and the interesting thing for me is about the sort of the unprecedented nature of it. It's not been done before, and that's sort of bit, and very rare is the occasions where a deal of that sort of significance and magnitude have been meshed together over a period like this. So those sort of challenges I think are fascinating, and the sort of skills, those emotional skills, which I think are so underplayed in these sort of things, are so important within it. The next phase of it then is integration, because traditionally some of the biggest issues around M&A have been cultural fit and colliding those cultures together. My gut tells me, and this will be a really interesting thing for you to see if that gut is whispering correctly to me at the moment, is actually this could have made that slightly easier. That in a position like that, when you are more remote and everyone is fragmented, actually to put two units together and potentially not have to worry quite so much about the cultural assimilation of two organizations, as to whether that is something which made it easier or even more difficult.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, right? I think there are parts of it that you could say are easier because everyone's remote, everyone's distributed. You can communicate probably a lot more seamlessly, right, in that sense. But I also think there's challenges with it, right? Which is you can't do those office visits. You can't do those, get people together, do a social, integrate individuals from different teams.
Win hearts and minds,
yeah, exactly. So some of that, like those softer things, are really kind of have been difficult. But to be honest, I think the way I've always looked at it throughout my career is like communication is key, transparency is key, and then building trust and relationships is key, right? So kind of like it takes a lot more, as I said, emotional energy to like kind of do those things. But I think kind of as long as you're doing it with authenticity I think that a lot of the time, whether that's in person or remote, people can pick up on that.
So this is a really interesting aspect for me, because again, if we look at so the traits of the leaders who I think specifically over the last year have got this very, very right. You know, as with anything you'll ever read about leadership, one of the great tenements of it is strong and authentic communication. So, you know, the tub thumping speech in the office of the new day is obviously not able to happen on that, and just actually giving a presentation to, you know, across the screen is very, very difficult. You know, even the internal town halls here and such, like just trying to read the room and the things you'd usually do and see who's there and engage and who's not, are cues that you just can't get at the moment, and it makes it really, really interesting. So one of the things we want to do on this show is get everyone walk away from it with a couple of sort of real bits to say, yeah, I can implement that and I can do it. Now, for you to have been a business that's done what you've done, that communication, I think, has got to have been absolutely on point. So if you were to look back on that, and I know this isn't a question with any prep whatsoever, but if you're to look back on that and say, look, these are some of the things that we did really well, and some of the sort of the key tips on communication of such a difficult message at such a difficult time in such a difficult way, what would be some of the takeaways that you take from that?
I think there's a couple of things, right? And I do appreciate the curveball that you're throwing here. I think the one thing that leaders and even individuals within an organization have to appreciate is you have to have empathy. You have to understand how other people are feeling, how other people may react. And then that really feeds into that authenticity, right? Acquisitions, mergers, investments, they all bring a different emotional type of energy to different types of people, right? So you've got to be empathetic to how people are feeling, how it affects them, how it affects their role. And that's amplified in the world of a pandemic, because people are unsure, people are nervous, right? It's a different world we live in. So I think empathy is the key one. A lot of the things that we do well is, how do you keep engagement, right? So like we do these video calls, right? And we were chatting beforehand, right? Being engaged is the hardest thing, right? So the content we're sharing has to be engaging. The words that we're saying have to be engaging. So I think it's really less of the rah-rah and more of the, can you connect it to what your audience is expecting, what they do on a daily basis? And again, that ties back to the empathy part.
It's fascinating. Really, really interesting things. And in terms of where it moves further forward in that sort of quest for the golden source of truth, what's next for the business? How do you top that?
So we actually topped it by acquiring a company called Satuit shortly after we acquired Alessa. So kind of that really was another opportunity, a way to accelerate our growth and accelerate our entry into the buy side. So we've always looked at ourselves as the kind of connectivity between the corporate, the sell side, and the buy side. And really the acquisition of Satuit, which is a wealth management and asset management CRM platform, gives us that acceleration into that market, but also starts to give us some of that connectivity, right? So kind of we are continuing to look at opportunities that kind of fit in with our vision and our strategy of being the golden source of truth, the end-to-end client relationship management tool. And then I think really just continuing to let the market know that we're here, this is what we do, but we're more than just a CRM company.
Absolutely. The interesting thing about growth is obviously you've had this sort of M&A route. Talk to me about the sort of organic side as well. The team's grown, and you've been looking to me, and I've looked at this on the outside in. You've been growing headcount within the business. What are some of the challenges you've seen there?
So the first part is where we are with growth. So we've expanded our operations into EMEA and APAC. So we're seeing a lot of traction in that market in terms of like kind of being able to transform some of those clients that are like kind of maybe lagging behind a bit. And we've had some pretty decent recent wins in the European market, which kind of are just setting us up for future growth and success. So internationalization is one area of it. And then I think kind of really just ensuring that we have the right skill sets, the right mindsets to help us go forward, right? So obviously with acquisitions, you kind of attract talent, you gain talent, and then managing how we continue to run the business while growing organically, right? Because acquisitions are great, inorganic growth is opportunistic and great, but the bread and butter is the organic growth that you can make. And we're definitely seeing traction on the core products that we have within the market.
And when we look at you're building this sort of ever increasing sort of suite and opportunity with people who are watching this at the moment, who should be talking to you? What sort of companies should be reaching out to you right now?
I think, listen, if you have compliance needs, you have relationship management needs, whether you're on the sales side or the asset management side of the world, definitely should be reaching out to us to have a conversation. The way I approach the business is really kind of more less about selling you software, but more about understanding how we can help you resolve pains that you have, but also thinking about the future. It isn't about what's happening here and now, but clients may come to us with challenges that they're facing that they may be thinking like a 2-3 year roadmap. And they're the great conversations that we have, which also help us refine our strategy, refine our approach, and try and be more collaborative in a partnership model, as opposed to just being, hey, we're a vendor that sells software.
It's far more of a solution that you're putting towards your customers.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if I look again at those, those golden threads that I keep talking about, that sort of solution client led, which comes into the whole world of interoperability and collaboration and everything that's thrown into there in between. Yeah, those businesses that really get that and aren't forcing products onto people, but actually listening and doing that. And if I look at the most successful sales people and sales teams that we've spoken to, interviewed, placed over the course of the last year or so, those ones who've stopped selling and started listening have been the classic winners in all of this. And it's good to see that so many of those core traits that you've been talking about all the way through this conversation have been in there as well. So there will doubtless be people who are listening there and clamoring to get in touch with you, Manish, through this as well. What are the best ways of them doing that?
They can reach out to me directly. I think we can put our email address down at the bottom here, but tier1fin.com is our website. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. We have all of the main social channels. So yeah, listen, if there's an opportunity or a conversation that you'd like to have with myself or anyone at our company, then definitely do reach out.
Thank you so much. Listen, this has been an absolutely fascinating episode for me. It's I've loved hearing about the story. I love really diving into the interesting different ways of people that have approached this, and to hear your story, and actually to sort of dive into what's happening in that world and how much opportunity that there still remains in that CRM space. I think has been nothing other than a pure joy. So thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your wisdom today.
No, Toby, thank you for having me. It's been a blast for the last 30 minutes or so. So hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. I'm definitely following it up if you aren't. Anyway, so thanks for coming on the show, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks so much.